these projections about, okay, that person might win. We saw it with Rick Santorum when he eventually won Iowa.
Right.
And with Newt Gingrich, everybody thought, okay, he was going to
Right.
come up. Do these individual state victories, do they have a significance in the overall process? Can they really be indicative of what the final outcome will be?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the beginning of the process, if you looked at the number of candidates that we had within the Republican Party at the end of last year, before they had any vote, there were 8 or 9 major candidates. These are former governors or current governors or senators or prominent business people that were running for the Republican Party contest. And losing Iowa and losing New Hampshire, those first 2 states, you saw a lot of people drop out. And so it's a process they call winnowing, that you bring down the number of candidates that are viable candidates. And so now that we have, basically, we've gone through about 10 states that have had votes now over the last 2 months. And we're left only with 4 major Republican Party candidates. And it's going to be very interesting coming up here on March 6th, because they have a process called Super Tuesday, in which 10 states are going to vote basically all that one day. So we've already had about 10 votes, 10 that have voted, and we're going to have another 10 voting at once. And so I think they'll begin to see, depending on how that breakdown goes, you'll begin to see front runners really moving out. So that'll be an interesting process to watch. But
you don't see, I mean, everybody hypes up Super Tuesday, but do you see it as sort of being a culmination of this primary process, or do you expect it to go on?
It wouldn't be surprising if it did go on a bit longer. The states that are going to vote later on in this year include states like Texas and California that are very large states that have large populations, and so there are a lot of these delegates that we had talked about that are still out there. And so if a candidate still has finances, if they still have support in some of these upcoming states, then they may be willing to remain in the race for even longer.
One other question about delegates. You always see, on the newspapers and things like that, the sort of the delegate counter. Right. And what we see is that Mitt Romney is by far in the lead compared to all the other candidates. So, I mean, isn't it possible to think that Mitt Romney sort of has this now, or is it still too early? Oh, no, it's absolutely too early. I mean, as I mentioned, there's over 1,000 delegates they have to gather. And right now, Mitt Romney has under 200 official delegates that he has won in these various state primaries, not counting some of the superdelegates who may be committed to work with him. And then you have Rick Santorum, who's running second in the delegate count. And so if you're looking sort of from the horse race standpoint, while Romney may be in the lead right now, if you look at some of the tracking polls nationally, Santorum is still doing very well. And so undoubtedly he and his supporters are very energized by that and very committed to remain in the race. But finances is really what it comes down to. So a candidate has to be viable in terms of their ability to draw in money to remain in the race. The 2008 presidential election, in which Barack Obama became America's first African-American president, was the costliest in the history of the United States, with the overall expenditure running into billions of dollars. This year, Republican candidate Mitt Romney has attracted a lot of attention, mostly negative, for being one of the richest presidential candidates in history. Along with that, campaign finance has become a much talked about issue during this election season. In this next report, we take a closer look at the campaign finance laws governing American elections and why people are concerned.
Next month, former Democratic presidential candidate John Edwards will be in court to face charges of violating campaign finance laws during his unsuccessful 2008 presidential run. This year, campaign finance has become a prominent issue early on in the primary election process. Most of it has to do with a change in the campaign finance law in 2010 that made it possible for individuals and corporations to donate limitlessly toward campaigns supporting a particular candidate or an issue. All the campaigns have already benefited immensely from this regulation. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney has had the biggest advantage from that party, but President Obama is expected to outdo all candidates with the amount of money he can attract for his campaign. Now, there is growing concern that this may be corrupting the electoral process, where the person able to attract the richest donors will become president of the United States. However, it is unlikely that candidates will oppose the practice because of its enormous benefits. Even President Obama, who opposed the ruling that changed the law, is now reaping its rewards. Reporting for Global Perspectives, I'm Vaishnavi Velraj from News First International Desk.
In the second part of our interview, we continue our conversation with Christopher Teal of the U.S. Embassy to talk more about campaign finance. It is an issue that has been attracting a lot of attention and could have a major influence in the outcome of the race. Coming on to finance and sort of campaign finance laws, but first finance. I mean, again, Mitt Romney by far has all this money that's coming in, and we see all these reports, and Rick Santorum has been struggling in that area thus far. So I ask you again, does he have that financial power to keep going and maybe make it to the end of the race?
Well, that is a fair question. I think a lot of his supporters would want to see victories in order to be able to finance more of the campaign. But finance is a little bit more tricky now than it used to be with some changes in the finance laws. Individuals currently they're capped at what they can donate to an individual candidate running for president at $2,500. So if I were going to donate to a candidate, that's all I could give. There are other mechanisms, however, that are currently going on that have been deregulated, so to speak, by the courts, and that allows people to funnel money into campaigns in a way that is having some unintended consequences, I think, in the current system. So it's a little bit hard to gauge how that might play yet.
So you're talking about these things called the PACs and the super PACs, I'm assuming. Can you explain a little bit more what that is?
Right. The political action committees, or PACs as they're called, have existed actually for quite a while, and people are able to donate to these political action committees, and they usually are very issue-focused. So somebody maybe who's very interested in environmental issues might have a political action committee that focuses on environmental issues. But obviously also some of these committees are very candidate-centered. And so we're seeing money being put into campaigns that maybe would help particular candidates. In 2010, there were a couple of important court decisions. One was a Supreme Court decision and another a federal court decision that basically deregulated a lot of the restrictions that earlier on had existed about campaign finance laws. And so now it's possible to give much more to these deregulated PACs, and in the case of the super PACs, there really is not a limit in terms of the amount of money that can be given. And so if you as an individual have $1 million and you want to give to a political action committee or one of these super PACs, you're able to do so. But the law does state, however, that there can't be a direct link between a campaign and one of these PACs. And so what that means is there's got to be, at least on paper and in reality, some sort of barrier between, for example, the Romney or Santorum or Obama campaign and one of these political action committees that is really pushing for the election of one of those candidates.
Finally, having watched the U.S. election process for so long in a very close way, can you help us understand the voters? Are they easily swayed? Are U.S. voters pretty much strictly in their parties? Do you find a lot of independent voters? What's the voter mentality like?
Sure. No, that's always tricky. And the two major parties have their solid core, their base, that they always are trying to make sure get out and support them and really become energized. And so that's often why you'll see during the campaign, the early parts of the campaign, they really try to appeal to the base. And so you've got maybe 30, 35%, 40% that are Democratic, 30, 35%, 40% that are Republican, and those are the bases. But the election is really won in the center. It's really won with the independents. And so which way the independents swing, and the independents could be 15, 20% of the voting population overall, which way they swing is going to really affect the overall campaign. And so the primary process, where they're Republican or Democratic partisans really in sort of in the discussion, then you see maybe more sharp rhetoric. When it comes to the general election, they really do try to appeal to the moderate voter. And some years they try to break this down by demographics. I remember the famous soccer mom, the suburban mother who was sort of the archetypal voter that people were trying to appeal to. And so they do try to break down those demographic changes to see who is that swing voter, who is that person we most need to focus on from both parties. And ultimately those people probably do win the election in the end.
to end on a lighter note, you mentioned the soccer mom. Do you think Sarah Palin will come back into politics in any way?
Well, she's certainly very active. She's a commentator on television in the United States, and she's very active with the partisans within the Republican Party. She's a very popular character, and so while she's not a candidate in any way right now, you never know. So I mean, that's the beauty of politics.
Great. Well, thank you once again, Chris. This has been a very interesting conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
On Super Tuesday, that's tomorrow, 10 U.S. states will hold elections to select a Republican presidential nominee. With more than 400 delegates up for grabs, it will be a crucial test to see who has the electability to defeat President Obama in November. On the one hand, an early finish to the Republican primary race could help the party rally behind one candidate, but on the other hand, having the Republican race go on this way for a few more months could help strengthen the grassroots activity of the party. That could really help in the general election. Election fever in the U.S. is running high, and we'll continue to follow the story for you until the very end in November. And with that, we wrap up this edition of Global Perspectives on MTV Sports. Before we leave, I want to remind you again that this will be our permanent time on the new channel, and we hope you'll continue to join us. And until next week, good night and have a great week.